my brain scan, for example, it shows top brain injury and frontal lobe injury. Well, if you have frontal lobe injury, it can affect memory. It can affect emotional dysregulation. That's your empathy centers. It can affect decision-making or impulsivity.
This is episode number 49 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast. My name is Conrad Weaver. I'm so glad you decided to join us today. You know, we drop these episodes every Wednesday morning. They are available on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and other channels. So I encourage you to be sure to subscribe. That way you know each time when we drop an episode. And we have some special episodes coming up in the near future, so stay tuned for those. Today, my guest is my friend, Dan Jarvis. Dan played a role in helping one of the main subjects in my film, PTSD 911, and he's the founder of Tactical Resiliency USA and the nonprofit organization Healing the Hero. Dan is an Army combat vet, a former deputy sheriff, and a survivor of combat-related trauma and injury. He's passionate about bridging the gap between military and civilian healing and empowering others to become the best version of themselves. Stay tuned for this informative conversation about healing trauma-related injuries. I hope you are enjoying this podcast and that you're getting something out of it. And I'd love to hear from you. Your comments or thoughts on what you're experiencing is important to me. So send me an email or leave a comment on the YouTube channel or on Apple Podcasts. That would mean a whole lot to me. And please subscribe. I promise to do everything I can to continue to bring you content that matters to you. And when you subscribe, invite your tribe to join as well. Share the links. Let's get more people listening. Let's get more people to a better place so that we can have a greater impact in the world. Thanks again for being here. And now here's my conversation with Dan Jarvis. Well, Dan Jarvis, welcome back to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. It's so good to see you again.
Conrad, I am so glad to be able to come here and talk with you. You've been all over the place. I've been kind of following you, and all the way from your bike ride cross country to, you know, the all the accolades you got for the PTSD 911. Congratulations on that. You're doing amazing things, brother. Keep it up.
Thanks so much. It has been an amazing journey, and one day maybe I'll write a book about it.
You should.
But anyway, but this is more about you than it is me. So tell us a little bit about what you're up to. I know you had made some changes recently in the recent couple of months. You're no longer with 22-0, and let's talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's crazy the journey that God puts before you, you know, and it's like, you know, I can't make this stuff up. What we're doing now, it's more of it's like a transformation of what we were doing before. So a good friend of mine, Abel Rodriguez, he's one of the co-founders of the new nonprofit. It's called Healing the Hero. And what it is, it's a Christian faith-based ministry focusing on healing PTSD, depression, anxiety amongst the first responders, amongst the veterans, active military, Gold Star families, you know, crime scene techs, 911 dispatchers, you name it. Even like medical examiners, we're including White Star families, which is families that have lost service members to suicide or veterans to suicide. And we're using the faith component to bring healing on that journey. It's kind of like a transformation of the methods we were using before, and we can actually bring a person's faith into healing. And it's pretty profound and it's pretty remarkable. You know, because when I came back down here to Florida, I was like, you know, Lord, please bless this next venture, whatever it is you have me doing. And it was weird. I had a dream that night, and I was doing the methods a very specific way in my dream. And when I woke up, I'm like, oh, that could work, right? So I wrote it down. And I ended up going out to San Antonio to work with a veteran nonprofit, the Semper America's Fund. Me and Abel went out there and worked with some active duty Green Berets. And then I met up with a buddy of mine who's a active duty captain. I think he's getting ready to be promoted to major. We were stationed together in Fairbanks. And I'm like, all right, you're going to be my guinea pig, Josh. And I did the new method. We lit up 8 traumatic triggers. They were all like 8 to 10 levels on a 0 to 10 scale. And, you know, within 8 minutes, they were all zeroed out. Right. So I was like, holy cow, this is really cool. And so we've been, you know, kind of honing that process, and we've refined it to where we could diffuse a trigger in about 4 to 6 minutes. And I mean, it's just mind blowing. We went out to California, Abel and I both, on the Tactical Resiliency USA side, which is it's my training and consulting company on the for-profit, and the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Office flew us out there, and they brought in 10 deputies with the most critical events, the most stress. And we kind of did a little rapport building, gave them a class on PTS and whatnot. And then we were able to do the protocols on about 10 of them while we were out there. And they were just mind blown. Like literally all of them felt relief. All of them slept that second night. And the sheriff out there, Jeff Dirks, he's a West Point grad. He was an infantry commander in Iraq. So he gets it. He understands, the nature of trauma. And was talking to Susie, their wellness director, and Susie's awesome. And he's like, Susie, do you realize we got 100% positive feedback from these guys? If you know anything about law enforcement, you're lucky to get 30% because we're dealing with a bunch of jabronis all the time, right? So it's so cool to get the kind of validation from and the feedback from the first responders. And
so you're in this new place, using, working more in the area of faith. So going back, for those who are uninitiated on what you're doing, give us kind of the cliff notes of what the protocol is.
So the protocol uses visual disassociation to remove the traumatic trigger. In other words, the anatomy of a trauma is horrible event occurs, your emotions activate, you get into that what's called fear, terror, or helplessness. And then the amygdala wants to remember to preserve your life in the future. So it glues all of the emotions, the sounds, the smells, the memories, and it sticks to that bundle around the memory. And it's like you get into what we call an OODA loop, or a negative feedback loop. You smell something, you see something, you hear something, and your amygdala activation happens. Once that amygdala opens, the 10th cranial nerve starts dumping cortisol into your body, adrenaline into your body. You're going into fight or flight. I got to get out of here, right? I'll give a prime example. A war vet goes to Iraq, comes home, and then trash day, all of a sudden he's swerving to miss trash cans, because in Iraq, that's where they placed the IEDs, and he experienced an IED blast. So the nervous system says, red alert, let's save ourselves and let's get away from this threat, right? It was for the saber-tooth tiger in the jungle, right? The twig snapping, right? The thing that your brain needs to hold on to survive. So that becomes problematic because many people can trigger multiple times. It might be watching a television show and all of a sudden somebody shoots a gun on the show and boom, they're back in Iraq and their nervous system activates, or they're playing a video game or something. So what we can do now is actually pinpoint that trigger, use visual dissociation, and there's a rewind part in there where it unravels the emotion at the amygdala. It rewires the brain. Neuroplasticity is what it's called. You're basically rewire the brain in real time. So you can literally take somebody with a full-on traumatic trigger and then release that trigger. In the older methods we used to use, it would take maybe 20 minutes to 40 minutes, depending. And then emotions were a separate protocol where we would reframe events. It's kind of like, I always tell people, do you ever get really angry at somebody and you're feeling it, and then all of a sudden you realize you're wrong, and then all that emotion just releases and dumps? It's the same thing, because the brain finally made sense of the event, right? Well, if you're 6 years old, you don't know how to make sense of something where there's a lot of anger present. So you keep recycling that anger. So we could go back to those roots, open those loops back up, add new information that give the brain the aha, and then it lets go of the emotion, and then it changes your patterns. So that was a secular model called the Trauma Resiliency Protocol for the trauma and emotions management process for emotions. And now with the newer method, it's kind of merging the two together. So there's only one method to do, and for trauma and emotions. And it's just so remarkable. I bought a Evoke machine from Dr. Hagedorn, and I'm actually going to go pick it up next week and getting my second brain scan done, which I'm super excited, like a kid at Christmas, because I've been doing his neural feedback for the last 7 months. And that's on the TBI side. And we'll talk about that too, because that's part of the component Healing the Hero is going to add to it. So you could literally see trauma on a brain scan, right? It's usually, we've been calling it the invisible wounds of war or whatever. Well, now they're visible. So we can actually see the brain light up in very specific places. There's a part on that Evoke system where you close your eyes. You do an exercise with eyes closed, and the whole back of the brain on that lights up. And that's amygdala activation. And then, Dr. Hagedorn can look at it and say, well, that's what PTSD looks like on a brain scan, because you're losing situational awareness when you close your eyes, and then the amygdala opens. And then you can do work with people and then do follow-up brain scans. So I'm excited because we're going to publish probably 3 studies independently with the new method. It's going to be the peer rescue protocol. And on the faith side, we call it the Jesus protocol, because what we do is we introduce Jesus into that disassociated part. And the framing comes from a spiritual perspective. So it's super cool. And then we'll be able to start getting the validation, the scientific validation. And I'm super excited because we actually now have a patent pending on all of the methods. So that was a pretty cool objective to be able to achieve, to protect and preserve the protocols. And lots going on. I mean, and I want to go into a little bit about what we're doing with the TBI part, because if you're looking at veterans since 9/11, there's an estimated 400,000 combat veterans who have had blast injuries, right? And they're still struggling with symptoms, right? Because what people don't understand is, PTSD and TBI have overlapping symptomology, right? So I'll take my brain scan, for example. It shows top brain injury and frontal lobe injury. Well, if you have frontal lobe injury, it can affect memory. It can affect emotional dysregulation. That's your empathy centers. It can affect decision-making or impulsivity or executive function, right? So somebody may be like, man, I used to be so with it and now I can't figure things out. Well, what we can do now is put somebody through neurofeedback, and the neurofeedback starts rewiring the brain. It takes a little bit of time, but you know what? I'll take 6 months to a year to fix my brain to prevent the problems that's going to happen later in life. Because one of the things that used to scare the heck out of all of us is Parkinson's, dementia, and Alzheimer's. Those are all things that you're high risk because of frontal lobe injury, because that's where most of those neurological injuries are from, frontal lobe. And I think what got me the most is when Dr. Hagedorn looked at my scan and he goes, you're high risk for dementia.
Wow.
And I'm like, oof.
That's gotta be scary.
I watched my grandfather spiral with dementia, and my other grandfather died with Alzheimer's, neither of which I have zero interest in. So I've been literally sticking to his regiment ever since then. So that's why I'm so excited to go back and see how much change there is on the brain scan, because that's next level stuff.
It's amazing how the technology has evolved, that in years past, even probably 10, 15 years ago, psychologists, psychiatrists would bring a patient in and they would guess at what's going on, a lot of times, and then prescribe whatever they prescribed, whether it was medication or therapy or whatever it was. But it wasn't an exact science. And now with the technology, you can more pinpoint exactly what's going on, because you can actually see the brain. I know Dr. Amen, with the Dr. Amen clinics, he talks about, and I heard him speak a couple of years ago at the PSPSA conference, and he talked about how, psychologist is the only medicine that doesn't actually look at what's broken, and now with the technology that's evolved, we can start seeing what's broken and seeing what needs to be repaired and what needs to be fixed.
Yeah. Because what I found fascinating, just on the PTSD side, when Dr. Hagedorn scanned the brain of the person in your documentary, it was like he said to her, and I remember this, I think he said, "Young lady, your brain scan is the worst one I have ever seen." Right. And he goes, and I work with MARSOC, active duty, which is Marine Special Operations Command. And he said, looking at your subjective scores, your PCL for PTSD, depression, and anxiety scores were maxed. Your brain scan matches what you're feeling. And there was so much validation for her in that moment, because she realized, I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Right. I'm injured. Right. And that was the same thing for me on the TBI side. When he did my brain scan, And he literally says, well, from what I'm seeing, and he just looked at the report after he did the scan, like 10 minutes later, he goes, from what I'm seeing, these are probably the symptoms that you're experiencing. And it was emotional for me because I'm like, I'm not crazy, right? I'm just injured. Okay. I've done so much work on the emotion side of the thing. Is why am I still having some of these issues? And I'm like, okay, now I have a plan, and now I can get fixed. Yeah, it's fascinating, where neuroscience is going to be in the next 10 to 15 years, because even what we're doing, as we get the evidence-based moniker, whatever you want to call it, then it can open up, because there's a lot of therapists that we've trained. There are some early adopters, but the way the brain works, we have these beliefs, right? Mm-hmm. And when we're educated by people, we kind of stick in this belief structure. And, the modern psychology, there's a box, and they don't deviate. They don't go outside of that box. How many times I've heard the word, well, where's your peer reviewed literature? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, so wait a minute. You mean to tell me you want 30 doctors to read the same article and come to the same conclusion? Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, well, where's the innovation come from? Mm-hmm. Right? The cab companies were never going to make Uber, right? Right. The hotel companies were never going to do Airbnb or VRBO. Mm-hmm. Innovation always comes from the outside, and it will get there. The evidence is coming. When you have a heavyweight like Dr. Hagedorn in your corner, and as we get ready to do some official clinical studies, it's just it's exciting to see where that's going to go, because then they can do the NIH clinical trials. Mm-hmm. Then they can get into the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials or whatever. It's going to take probably years to get into the mainstream. But until
in the meantime, you have people that report health and healing.
Yep.
Because of this,
well, right? and that's the beauty of it. It's like, once we started training our peers, veterans, first responders, military, cops, paramedics, whoever, we're a group of people that really don't, except maybe cops tend to like evidence, but we're people that just want to, hey, how do I feel better? Right. I don't care if you have initials before your name or after your name, if you can help me get through this. And it's been really a 6 year, almost 6.5 year, grueling grassroots kind of movement, where we've been coming from the bottom up. But we had to, we couldn't wait for the clinical world to catch up. We realized that there was no one else was coming, right? So we had to stand in the gap as nonprofits, and there's so many good nonprofits out there doing so many good things, and I wish we had a more united front when it comes to that, because at Healing the Hero, what's really cool is we're starting to make partnerships, and we're going after the faith-based communities, where we can literally, hey, let me train your nonprofit to do what we do. Right. Mm-hmm. And then instead of giving one of your people a fish and they eat for the day, we're teaching you to fish, and you can eat for a lifetime. The more people that we train, the more people, because if one coach works with 10 people in a year, well, you know what, that's 10 lives that literally get transformed. And not just those 10 lives, but their families. Imagine a world where PTSD and depression and anxiety and suicide were not on the table anymore. Right. That's a world that would be phenomenal. All the kids that would still have their moms and dads and brothers and sisters, and families would be flourishing versus grieving, because we all know once that first responder or that veteran dies by suicide, well, yeah, their suffering has physically ended, and everybody else around them, it's just begun. So if you're out there and you're considering anything, there are some seriously effective alternative ways to heal. You don't have to struggle at all, right? There's no need to struggle, right? Everyone's brain has the ability to reprocess emotions, and I always tell people, I'm not doing this to you. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this with you. You're driving a car, and I'm just kind of holding a map. We're just showing your brain how to format things to release it. And it's pretty powerful. And then you add the faith component to it, and it's like next level. The fastest disconnect I went to the American Association of Christian Counselors Conference. We set up a booth under the Jesus Protocol banner, and we did like 45 small interventions at the conference. And the quickest one, a lady released a 10-level trauma in like 2 minutes, right? That's unheard of, right? And really all we're doing is teaching your brain how to respond differently to the stimuli, right? Image comes in, smell comes in, sound comes in, and the brain's got to process it. Okay, I'm going to process it this way now, versus nervous system going red alert, because it's a crappy feeling when the chemicals dump into your body. It's like every emotion hitting at the same time, and it's pretty remarkable. And the connections, like Abel and I are going to be at Fort Liberty, which used to be Fort Bragg. We're going to be there next week, doing a workshop with one of the Army units that's getting ready to deploy. How cool is that to be able to go work with some active duty folks? And unfortunately, it came after the suicide of a 24-year-old service member. And a buddy of mine is stationed out there, and he came home off of leave, and he said, "Hey man, I think we need you to come up here. The vibe is not real good right at the moment." And he kind of shared the story, and I'm like, "Yeah, I remember those days, man. It's very uncomfortable for everybody, because somebody they worked with and loved and cared about, made that one decision that they can't take back." So we're going to be able to go up there and demonstrate, and then Abel and I are just going to work with people at that company all day long, and then we're going to have Healing the Hero on standby. Our coaches will, family members at home, and even kids, to be able to go through the protocols. And the coolest part is we've taken the profit out of it, right? Healing the Hero takes no money for treatment for anybody in the mission. Shouldn't have to, right? We make that sacrifice for our country, our community. And like the term you used, I heard you say one time, is we outsource that trauma to them. They shouldn't have to pay for treatment. So we cover the cost of that. And that's pretty cool. And it's funny because I've had people say, "Well, what's it going to cost?" I'm like, "It's not going to cost you anything." "Oh, come on, man. There's a catch. There's seriously, so what? There's nothing free." I said, "All right, you caught me. There is a catch. When you heal, you got to send me 3 or 4 of your buddies." "Oh, I can do that." And the next thing you know, you've made a contractual arrangement with them. I have one guy who has sent probably 100 people.
Wow.
He does fly fishing in Georgia, and he takes vets out all the time, and he sends them to get healed all the time. So that's how we've been growing, and that's how we can continue to grow. But it's exciting.
Yeah. In your experience going through the protocol, is there any what's the word? Does it come back? When you release from an emotion, when you release from a traumatic event, can it come back to get you again?
Conrad, that is a great question, and we get asked that all the time. As I understand it, in the neuroscience world, it's a process called memory reconsolidation. Once that emotion leaves the memory and they split apart, they're gone. They're done. So you're moving images to different filing cabinets in your brain. Right? The goal is to get that memory into your long-term storage. Right? You get it into your long-term storage, and then you no longer have the emotional attachment to it. Doesn't mean you can't be re-traumatized or build a new unhealthy negative emotional pattern. I mean, that's just how we are. The brain knows how to remember things, and it's putting emotions to it. So it's better to put a positive emotion to it than a negative, but we can still do that. But once that trigger's gone, it's gone. It's not going to come back. But it doesn't mean you can't have something new happen, or a deeply suppressed memory might pop up. Right. We see that sometimes where, we'll do work with somebody and they're doing great. Then all of a sudden, they're having weird dreams. The next thing they do, they remember another bad event. And that's what we call the weeds. Right. And the metaphor that I use is, that big trauma is like tarp on the grass. So if you put a plastic tarp over the grass, what happens to the grass under it? It dies. Right. That's the suppressed part of the brain. When you pull that trauma off and your body starts hitting the REM sleep cycles and cleaning up emotions, what's the first thing that grows through the dead grass? And that's the weeds. All right. So every once in a while, a weed will pop up, and that's just a hidden repressed memory. And then, we just tell them, all right, then we'll just work on it as it comes up. I recently worked with a veteran, and he had that happen, and I helped him heal the process over a text thread. We were just texting back and forth. Do this. Then he did it. Do this. You did it. Do this. And I said, how do you feel now? And he goes, wow, very different. Right. So that's the cool part, is there's so many different ways to apply that healing technique. I mean, who would have thought over a text message you could heal somebody's trauma? It's exciting to see where we're going to go.
Man, you're going to put some psychiatrists out of business.
Well, you know what though? I think most psychiatrists, like Dr. Amon's a psychiatrist, their first objective is do no harm, right?
Sure.
And I remember we did a viewing of another documentary in Orlando, and a psychiatrist was there that does TMS, the transcranial magnetic stimulation. So he had a part in that film, and he stood up and addressed 300 people. And he's like, I had no idea these methods even existed, the alternative treatments. So honestly, I think most psychiatrists, if they know it's real, they would be more than happy to see their clients heal, because most doctors hate pushing drugs, right? But that's what they're trained to do, right? If you're feeling these, I know that I can give this and maybe reduce some of your symptoms. They're trying their best to do what they can with the skills. So I honestly believe if most psychiatrists knew the realities, like once they start seeing the evidence, I think they're going to be all over getting somebody healthier. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. And it's not like there's a shortage of people out there.
Oh, no.
That need healing.
No. And the thing is and I tell this with the therapist, don't look at this as a scarcity concept, right? You're not going to lose clients because you heal them rapidly. It's like, I every time I say this isn't a silver bullet, right?
Sure.
We got to stop looking at it as this is the only way to heal. All right. This may get the 800-pound gorilla off your back. Well, guess what? Now you can go do your cognitive therapy and learn how to make better patterns moving forward. We're going to
learn how to live, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're going to move the old bad patterns out of the way so that you can make new good patterns. And oftentimes, so many times I've worked with people that are like, oh my God, I have so many people I need to apologize to now, because they realize in their triggered states they were, a jackwagon to somebody. So that's the cool part. So it's just one part of the continuum of care. That's all. That's the way I look at it, and that's the way I frame it when I talk to therapists.
Well, this is exciting stuff. It's exciting to learn what you guys are doing, and there's lots of people I need to introduce you to. So how can people find you? How can they reach you? What's that process?
So you go to healingthehero.org. All right, healingthehero.org. My cell phone number, I'll give it out because it's on our website, 863-221-6304, and Dan at healingthehero.org. And they can send me an email. There's a Heal Here button on the website. So if you like what you're reading on the site and you want to get involved, just click the button, fill in the information that comes directly to us. We'll connect you with a case manager. You'll do the assessments, and the case manager will put you with the right coach. And typically 2 sessions later, you're doing life like you were before anything bad ever happened. And that's all you got to do. And if you want to bring us out to your local community, your church, or if you have a nonprofit that you're interested in training, that's on the Tactical Resiliency USA side. But you can reach us through Healing the Hero.
And you're doing trainings as well. You're coming out to communities and you're training people.
Yep. That's the Tactical Resiliency side, or TRUSA is what we call it. It's a lot easier to say TRUSA than Tactical Resiliency USA. But that's the training and consulting. So that's what we're going to Fort Liberty under, and we may even actually be working with some of the first responders that were at the Trump rally. So we've one of our board members who's a career fire services, deputy chief fire marshal, has made connections with their critical incident debrief teams and their chief psychologist. So we may be going up there, or we may be doing the work remotely. And I pray to God that we get that opportunity, because a lot of them are struggling right now with what they experienced.
Is that Brucker?
Yeah, Don. Yeah. DB.
Yep.
He's so cool, dude. That dude's like one of my favorite. He's so boisterous and he's so outgoing, and we'll talk to anybody, and he's so passionate about listening to people. I'm like, dude, you're like one of the best listeners, and he's a good communicator. So DB's awesome.
I need to get him on my podcast.
You do need to. He's incredible, dude. He's
in fact, I'll send him a text right after we're done here.
Oh, dude, when you get into leadership at his level, and you can sit down person to person, one-on-one, without rank involved, and give people permission. That's all they need. People just need permission. That's why I share my story everywhere, to give people permission. I'll be doing a keynote speech, or not only if it's a keynote, I'll be speaking at a first responder wellness conference up in Des Moines, Iowa, coming up in September, just to give them permission. Right? That's all they need. They need permission.
Yeah.
It's okay to say I'm not okay. Right? We're human beings. So remember that, everybody. It's okay. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be traumatized. It's not your fault. right? Help us. Let's get you back up on the high ground.
Yeah. Well, Dan, you're doing great work. Thank you for your work. Thank you for supporting our film back a couple of years ago and being a part of that, and looking forward to connecting with you again soon. So, and I do look forward to connecting to do the training. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. You'll love the training, because training's so much fun, because you'll get to clean out the closet in training. And that's the beautiful part about training, is you go through all your own emotions. You know, we worked with an FDNY firefighter 20 years on the job, and that dude had so much stuff packed in there, you know, and it's like, to see him let that stuff go, he was blown away, right? It's so cool. I love it.
Wow.
I'm passionate about doing it. Doesn't feel like work.
Well, that's the whole point, right? If you can do something that doesn't feel like work and you're making a difference, that's you're living your purpose.
Amen.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll end it there. Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, brother.
Dan, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the podcast today. I'm looking forward to learning more about what your case study and seeing those results and what they will bring. Hey, thank you for watching and listening to this podcast. And remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.